Castology. This is Castology, and I'm one of your castologists, Ian C. Weber, here with my fellow castologists. Next to me at the table,
Harry George Wallace.
Diagonally across from me at the table,
Brittany Taylor Hetherington.
How are we all?
We're doing okay.
We have had
Don't speak for me, Harry.
a brief little hiatus because, you know, some of us haven't been okay.
That's true.
Yes, I am coming off the back of COVID. So if I cough, you are allowed to have an instinctual flinch reaction based on the fact that I won't see it and can't get offended.
I very rarely have an instinctual flinch reaction. I just judge you.
That's fair. I'm very used to that.
I'm a very stoic person.
Legitimately drank from Harry's glass, so I now view myself as a superhuman.
Yeah, on the day I got COVID, I think, wasn't it? Yeah.
I remember just seeing the message and I was like, my stomach fell. And I was like, oh.
But you got through it, and you clearly have the superior immune system.
Thank you. I'm inbred slightly.
Okay, well, that's on record forever. Should we explore that further or distract it by talking about podcasts?
Slightly. I was just going to say on my dad's side.
So now you're throwing your dad under the bus.
Yeah, I don't mind.
Okay.
There's two cousins. I guess it was a small town, but, you know, I just feel like getting a bike. you can do better. And as I said to Harry about this once before, it's not even like they were hot, so I just complete judgment.
I completely forgot about this. Oh, God, this has the potential to spiral for hours. We need to get into the business.
I think we can save that for later. Let's revisit that on another episode.
Amazing.
Maybe on another Getting to Know Brit episode.
But
what
Why
we're
do
doing
I have
here,
3 eyes? Anyway.
what we're doing here is we're recommending podcasts and reviewing podcasts that we have previously recommended. So you have all waited very patiently for the reviews of the podcasts we recommended on our last full episode. But before we get to those, let us recommend some new podcasts for you to listen to. I would like to hear first from Brit.
Me.
Yeah. What podcast are you recommending this week?
I have the worst idea of all time, and that's the name of the podcast and not me choosing the podcast.
You did say I have the worst idea of all time.
Yeah, but it's just phraseology. I should have put it on a voice. I'm presenting the worst idea. No, that's anyway of all time.
So, what is the worst idea of all time for those listeners who have not listened to it?
Yes. So, firstly, my description to Harry before is it's just a couple of boys being boys.
Mm-hmm.
New Zealander comedians basically listening to or watching the same movie consecutively for, I believe it's a year, and I think it's weekly, and they basically kind of just review how it's gone, their thoughts and feelings as they descend into madness.
You know that really bad date question of like if you had to be stuck on a desert island with like a DVD player and presumably a lifetime of AAA batteries, and you could have one DVD to bring with you. It's like someone brought that to life and made it hell and made it 2 New Zealanders, which I guess they are stuck on an island with potentially.
No.
So I think
Save them.
because the premise is that it's a bad movie, right? They're not watching a good movie.
Yeah, it's like someone took the worst of it.
Yeah.
Subverted it.
So
Yeah.
contentiously, they reviewed The Matrix, and I like The Matrix.
Okay, I don't think that's a very controversial opinion. So the later matrices?
Early. Yeah, I'm not sure what the plural form is, but I feel like it's a classic, but I haven't watched them in a while, so it could just be my child brain.
Sure. So do you like this podcast? So have you brought it because you like it, or you brought it because it's a fun idea?
I especially like the idea, I will be told. So it's kind of like, I was like, if I did it, I'd be better. No, anyway, but there was actually, I guess, a set of episodes that I particularly enjoyed. And I guess I had a kind of fondness for it because I hadn't seen the movie before. It was the Sex and the City 2. And as I've said before, I love trash. I like seeing the cringe. I like feeling it. It makes me feel better about my acting in all in all. So I'm like, my life's more together.
There's a lot of Brit on the line in this podcast tonight. Just laid it bare.
I'm an open book. Diary in a monologue.
Genealogy.
Oh no.
That was good. I enjoyed that.
Anyway, but no, I also watched Sex and the City 2 with my partner Tom then as well, and so we just kind of really enjoyed the chaos on top of that.
I feel like that would be the way to watch it, to actually watch the movie and then realise what they've got to do every week for a year.
Yeah, and it was a
fun.
coupling. And it's unfortunate in that, I mean, I never actually watched The Sex and the City beyond, I guess, being exposed occasionally on TV. But I did appreciate that even though the movie was trash, the two boys that were hosting the podcast really got into it in terms of like justice for the characters. This is not how they should be portrayed in terms of their original story arc. So they weren't just doing it for like cheap laughs of lol, Sex in the City. They were like,
not having listened to that whole season, because one movie is a whole season for them.
yes.
I'm not sure whether they went into it with like, we are going to analyze the heck out of this movie.
Yeah.
So much as they were like, well, this is hour 52, and what else do we have to say about this movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does sound like it's going to be one of those podcasts that are just it's about the banter as opposed to the premise. It's an excuse to get people together and talk, which is fine when the people have dynamism and charisma. So I guess we'll see.
Maybe that's the only reason, like their only excuse to meet up, and they're both just a bit shy. But then they get on the couch, simple, you know, cuddle up with your mate.
I'm sure they have a little bit of charisma.
You'd hope so, but I've seen a lot of stand up where that is not the
I
case.
was about to say, I think statistically you may be surprised.
I've been told at stand up comedy things to stop trying to give them supportive heckles.
You do engage an upsetting amount. I've been to stand-up comedy with you. It is...
It's like, I'm funnier than you.
No, it's not even about...
No, genuinely it's not
that.
that. She just tries to make conversation.
Because they ask the crowd questions and no one responds, and I feel so awkward that I'm like, yeah. You're right.
But anyway.
Sure. So the podcast is Worst Idea of All Time. How long are the episodes?
Ooh, I didn't realize there was going to be a quiz, even though it's a review. A long time.
Okay. All
You're
right.
welcome.
So I was just being nice and asking a question to make you seem like you knew all the answers.
Knowledgeable.
They're
was your
about half
first
an hour.
mistake.
Half an hour.
Yeah,
Thank
about
you so
half
much.
an hour long.
Well, I'm glad someone did their homework.
All right. Well, let's move on to Harry's recommendation.
So this time round, I am recommending Reply All, which if you are a podcast person, odds are you'll be familiar with.
Hate 'em.
It's a seminal podcast. It's very influential. The reason I'm recommending it is because A, it actually hasn't been recommended on this show before, partially because it is so big, I imagine. And B, because it's ending.
Yeah,
What?
very recently.
Very recently, after this kind of spiraling set of circumstances, which if you're a gossip hound is really interesting to read into.
Tell me later.
I will probably mention some of it on the podcast because it's interesting content. But Reply All has for many, many years just been excellent. When it's at its best, it is better than most other podcasts on the air, I would state personally. It's a big call, and I know a lot of people won't agree with that, but there are just some phenomenal episodes, just including things like following a hacker, somehow retracing the call. So what it is, let me give you an outline of the podcast if you are not familiar. It is a show where a couple of tech journalists explore the ephemera of the internet. So they will go through and they will do things like super tech support, where someone comes to them with an issue that is really odd and no one has been able to solve it. Like they keep hearing this one Elvis song on the radio and the radio is not broken, but it's on repeat, for example. This isn't real, but it's the kind of thing that they do. And they have to go and figure out why this particular thing is happening, and it usually devolves into some kind of wonderful story that flows along very, very well. And one of the best of these that I really enjoyed was where they called the hacker back. They were trying to do an over-the-phone scam, and they traced the call location and then called back the company pretending to be other people in business and like went down the rabbit hole tracing this hacker company and like trying to figure out how it worked. And then they flew to, I think, Mumbai in India and went and met the people who ran the hacking company and like went through the internal mechanisms of
Wow.
how these hacking companies work.
That's dedication.
And it was phenomenal. And they got into some really interesting circumstances where they were like, are we about to be murdered by the Indian mafia? I don't know what the equivalent of the Indian crime gangs who run hacker
I think you can
channels.
call it a mafia.
Yeah, it's a mafia. It's a
Yeah.
mafia, I guess.
Yeah.
You got to
So, yeah.
have dedication to that, like the follow through.
Well, they're investigative journalists, in a sense, and they do a very good job when they're at their best. So I cannot.
I think we can call them investigative journalists. Just
Yeah.
full stop.
Yeah, I'd agree. But Reply All is excellent, and yes, it is coming to an end. Should I talk briefly about why that is? Or?
Yeah, if you would like, or you can save it for next week. Like either one.
I can't handle not knowing. You have to tell me.
It can't handle.
Yes, fair. So it's really interesting with Reply All. Basically, they were doing this show about a magazine. I think it's called Bon Appetit.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah, and there was this reckoning within the Bon Appetit company about systemic racism and things that had gone wrong just in their general company layout and other facets. I'm going to have to abridge this a little bit because I don't remember all the details. But what happened was they aired this investigative episode about what was going on at the magazine, and then a bunch of people from the company who run this Reply All, which is Gimlet Media, were like, hey, this also happens with us. Maybe look into your own house before you start throwing stones. And it became a big thing, and it ended with one of the host of the podcast resigning, and they filled it with another host who recently come on board, Emmanuel Joji, who is an excellent podcaster in his own right. But I think it just never had quite the same energy, and it slowly wound down, and eventually they've decided to call it a day and pursue other projects. But certainly worth looking into if you're interested in modern affairs and journalism.
So it was a Bon Appetit magazine called The Test Kitchen.
The Test Kitchen, yeah.
And it was one of those situations where, like, Who Watches the Watchmen, where they uncovered something that they themselves were actually doing, and what do we happens now?
Yep.
Sort of things.
And it's quite an interesting, if you want to listen back to the recent episodes, it's interesting in its own right. I would recommend checking it out.
So does that mean that their solution to finding similar issues was to purely just run? Or was that person not directly involved in...
It was more of a mea culpa moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they tried to own up to it and fix the problem, but basically that kind of just was
stained the record type thing? Or?
Yeah, it was just it never had the same energy that it had before, and because they kept coming back because there was this kind of feeling of like, well, they did this, and so they lost a lot of fan base, and stuff like that.
And the other thing was, a lot of what makes the podcast great in its highlights is the energy between the two hosts. And one of the hosts resigned, so it kind of just, despite how great Emmanuel Joji was, it just didn't have the same appeal that a lot of people came to it for.
Rest in peace. I wonder what it would be like if hosts took over and it just didn't have the same vibe. Sadly, we'll never find out.
Yeah.
We'll never find out. I'm recommending the Drilled podcast.
Cool.
So from those two quite light-hearted entries, I want to say, Drilled is a true crime podcast about the climate crisis and clean energy. So it is a little bit angry making. I'm going to put that out there first.
Love that.
It's very sciencey. It's interview based, and it is, I'm going to say, a little dry. They don't tend to talk down or popularize a lot of their language. So it is
such a condescending way of putting that.
It's for smart people. So if you don't have an IQ of, which is
I view podcasting as a very popular medium.
Yes,
so
of course.
podcasters that don't kind of speak to the common person, I feel need to be called out for people who might go to it expecting that.
Oh, okay, for sure.
No, you're 100% right. I'm teasing. It's
accessibility.
That being said, a lot of the podcasts that I suggest do that because I particularly
Oh, sorry.
are guilty of that, simply because that is one of the reasons that one of the kinds of podcasts that I enjoy. Because I like feeling superior to people. But enough about me. So it is hosted and produced by investigative journalist Amy Westervelt. There are some great episodes on it. I think basically my recommendation is just read back through the episodes and pick something that kind of calls to you. Because if you don't do that, chances are you're going to get something that you're not particularly connected to and not particularly interested in.
I just like that it sounds a little bit naughty.
Yeah, sure, okay.
The title brings you in, and it's like, guess again, you're about to learn a thing.
I think if you look at the cover art, you might be like, the only naughty people here are the people who fucked our planet.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely what they're
liked
going
that.
for, because basically it's trying to uncover the reasons why climate action is taking so long.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
And both because of business interests in fossil fuels, but also business interests involved in renewable energies, driving it in ways that are for business and not for the actual change.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
So that's a lot of that. So definitely approach this when you're in the headspace. People who have listened to podcasts on this here podcast recommendation podcast before, when I say angry making, this is an angry making podcast. Potentially an angry making podcast, potentially a very interesting podcast that leaves you refreshed with the knowledge that you've learned. But I found myself quite angry after most of the episodes that I've listened to.
It'll be nice to direct my anger in a healthy way.
Yeah, sometimes the anger fuels you. You know,
It
sometimes
is good when you're righteously angry
Yeah.
and you're given reasons to be, rather than just like, I don't know why I'm angry, but I don't like Elon Musk.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a paladin rage versus barbarian rage for all you nerds out there.
Yeah, all you
ties
nerds out
nicely.
there.
Yeah.
None of them in here.
Mostly,
Oh,
it's
hey,
mostly for the
nerds.
ones in here. Let's be real.
So Drilled is a very popular podcast. It has been received a lot of accolades in the last few years. So very high production quality. So
This
yeah.
speaks to me.
So it's been going for quite some time as well.
Yeah, so launched in 2017. So it's gone for 5 years.
Was there a particular, I guess, issue that got them started, or brought it to the limelight that it has reached the trajectory it currently has beyond just climate crisis in general?
Well, it started out just as investigative journalism around climate action, and really it hasn't changed trajectory much from there. I don't think there was a particular catalyst that brought it to air. It was just that this is what was her name again? Amy Westervelt's kind of passion as an investigative journalist. And yeah, it's kind of struck a chord as one of the leading voices now.
Wow, yeah.
I will say it is part of
girl.
the Critical Frequency Network, which is a network dedicated to investigative journalism.
I'm very excited by a lot of this. On particularly dry podcasts, I do tend to struggle a little bit, but a lot of this is right up my alley in terms of the investigative journalism, the storytelling modus of it. I'm very excited. I think I'm either going to love it or hate it. So
Just use lube if it's dry.
what's going on tonight, Britt?
I don't know, but I'm having a nice time.
I'm anticipating you enjoying this mostly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that. I'm here for it.
Okay, well, let's move on to the podcast that we recommended last full episode. So last full episode, I recommended Strange Air, a fiction podcast.
Ooh, yes.
What did you recommend, Harry?
I recommended Dungeons and Daddies, one of my favorite wisecracking fantasy podcasts.
And Brett?
The Midnight Gospel podcast, which is just a podcast that I kind of liked.
That's a great way of describing the Midnight Gospel.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not really a podcast. It's kind of excerpts from a podcast that was put into a playlist. Let's start with that. No,
Lead you
honestly,
astray.
a lot of people who found Midnight Gospel on Netflix would have gone down the exact same journey. So yeah, let's talk about Midnight Gospel first. Why did you recommend it?
I originally recommended it because I just found it very calming and soothing in terms of, I guess, the background tones, but it still also had that element of storytelling that I like. So I guess it discussed different issues from, I guess, for instance, I think there was one surrounding death, but it was like addressed in quite
That was the one with his mother?
Yes.
Discussing her diagnosis of terminal cancer.
Exactly. And then they even had her on, I guess, the original podcast, not this particular
Duncan
adaptation.
Trussell Family Hour.
Yes.
Yep.
Say that 10 times really fast. Yeah, so it just brought in interesting perspectives. And even though I guess it was shocking, it just related in a way that I thought was an interesting point of view and thought very differently to my, I guess, frame of mind. But yeah, it had that calming element while still telling me a bit of a story with a realistic element. So I quite liked that.
What did you think, Harry?
I have very mixed feelings. I think I probably needed more of a guide. Like I probably needed a few episodes that were particularly good to dive into. So I kind of randomly sampled a few.
Yes.
And it hit me very much the same way, oddly enough, that Welcome to Night Vale hit me. And I feel like I'm one of the few podcasting people in the world who actually doesn't like Night Vale.
I find that interesting.
Yeah, you would not think, would you?
No,
You'd think it'd be the other way
you
around.
would like it, yeah.
What's Night Vale about? Sorry, for context.
Night Vale's a very popular fiction podcast, and it's kind of just this radio show.
Really? I've never heard of it.
Scattered out. Yeah, well, I think that's more of a youth problem.
The conceit is a community radio show set in a town of unimaginable horrors.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
and which I, on the outset, like I even love
Yeah.
the premise of that.
Absolutely.
But it's kind of this very choppy, changey. It's just like little fragments of story most of the time, from my experience of it. And yeah, I don't know, something I just with the Duncan Trussell Family Hour, despite being excited for it, I just didn't find anything to grasp onto.
That's fair.
In terms of my interest, and I feel like there's probably something in there. I just need to zoom in on it more. But yeah, I don't have a huge amount to say. I didn't love it.
I would definitely recommend it as you're in the bath, you got some bubbles, and you've got a red wine.
I also didn't find it very relaxing because of
really?
how
That's
choppy,
so
changey, and
interesting.
jumpy around it was. I kept being like a little disconcerted. I was like, "Oh, we're here. Oh no, now we're here."
So I think the Midnight Gospel podcast, in inverted commas, definitely...
Give it to me straight, Doc.
No, it definitely is, because it takes the best parts of the Duncan Trussell Family Hour and puts it into this kind of psychedelic relaxation ASMR
Yes, that's what I
space where it's the visual, like the Netflix show. It's very trippy, and they kind of lean into that. And I think the Duncan Trussell Family Hour is just kind of a 2-hour long ramble interview in the style of Joe Rogan, where Duncan Trussell got his start. So I think the Midnight Gospel distills the best parts of that podcast into a new text and kind of contextualizes it in a different way, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
I much prefer the Midnight Gospel to the Duncan Trussell Family Hour because there's just so much content that is...
They're just trying to reach the word count.
It's just kind of filling space in the
Right.
Duncan Trussell Family Hour.
See,
for me,
here's the thing. I did go and listen to the Duncan Trussell Family Hour because that's what I thought was meant by Midnight Gospel podcast. So maybe if I go and watch the show,
so there is a playlist on Spotify of the excerpts of the Duncan Trussell Family Hour that are shown in Midnight Gospel.
right?
Yeah. And the episode with his mother is kind of podcast famous because he's talking to his mother about how much he's going to miss her when she dies, and she's reassuring him that it's going to be okay. And it's a very touching, intimate thing that they're sharing, but they're also aware that this is kind of a moment with themselves.
Okay.
And it gets very metaphysical and that sort of thing as well. So it definitely, I think Midnight Gospel is the best parts of Duncan Trussell. I personally, like you, not a fan of Duncan Trussell Family Hour. There's just so much to get through to find that kernel of good thing in there that I enjoy.
Yeah, that's the
That's
impression
fair
that I
enough.
got. And I just, I like the kind of ASMR-y thing just didn't grab me.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
normally find ASMR stuff quite
No.
grating in general?
Oh, not grating, but it's just not my thing.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
I think I touched on it briefly, potentially last time, but I remember being in the office at work and someone was like, "Oh, another speech path likes this, aren't they? A freak?" And I listened to it and I was like, "Yeah, gross." Went back to my desk, immediately looked up the exact same video. So yeah, I don't know. I just find it quite calming.
That's fair. I think it's a good recommendation purely because it challenges what I'd usually listen to.
Stop it.
And also it's a really weird interpretation of a podcast that transferred to Netflix.
Yeah.
So it's a really weird
yeah.
example of what podcasts can turn into.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's go from that to Dungeons and Daddies.
Double D's, big old baps.
What did we think?
Well, tell us a little bit about it first. Why did you recommend Dungeons and Daddies?
To recap, I love Dungeons and Daddies. It's been one of my favourite running podcasts for a long time. Basically, it's a D&D podcast, Dungeons and Dragons, and it's from the perspective of 4 fathers from our world whose sons get lost in high fantasy world of the Forgotten Realms, and then they have to go into this world and find their sons. And it's by 4 people who, most of whom, I think like 2 or 3 out of the 4 have not really played Dungeons and Dragons before. So if you're a big, like, stringent rule-following D&D fan, it might not be for you, because it is all about the storytelling and comedy. And they're just consistently funny, or at least I find them so. I don't think there's been a single episode that has failed to make me laugh at least once, which for podcasts is pretty rare for me. The narrative is engaging. They all kind of have that one-upmanship energy, but in a fun, wholesome way. The situations they manage to get themselves into and then resolve is always very satisfying to me. I listened to it for a long, long time. That's why I recommended it.
I quite liked that they didn't try too hard, and they seemed to actually genuinely enjoy each other's company.
Yes, and you get that, which is like a classic. What's the
Parasocial?
That was exactly the word I was looking for.
If you
It's a
guys,
parasocial experience.
It is, yes.
if you played Articulate, you'd be the dream team.
If you're unfamiliar with the term, it's a film and it's a media term, parasocial, meaning that you empathise with the people behind the screen and you come to view them as your own friends in a kind of psychological way, and it's a lot of the thing, in my opinion, behind the success of D&D streaming, stuff like Critical Role, is that you come to kind of view these people as intimately, in a way, and they do that very well. They have a great banter, a great connection.
And I guess there's a lot of D&D podcasts out there. It's one of the pretty general go-to, like, what are we going to make type ones with it as the central focus.
Yeah, because the format comes with it, right?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
Yes.
I thought it was quite fun. Obviously, not everyone has a dad. I do. But I thought it had enough of the father stereotypes, at least, that you would have seen in standard media or through just a parental figure in general, that it was quite relatable to most persons.
Yeah.
I really quite liked the female. Maybe I'm biased.
Yeah,
Who's playing the dad, because she was just a gremlin of a woman.
Beth May, playing the worst possible interpretation of a stepdad.
It was my absolute favourite.
It's very good.
Yes.
Yeah, Ron Stampler is the stepdad she plays. The failed businessman, emotionally detached stepfather. Zane, what did you think?
I think this is one of the best examples of one extreme end of the podcast actual play spectrum, where this is rules light, comedy heavy, and if that's what you like out of your role playing games, listen to this. This is personally the kind that I like more than the other rules heavy kind. My perfect actual play podcast would be right in the middle, where it's great story and role play along with actually using the rules.
Goldilocks zone.
Yeah. So this time they kind of resort to the rules rather than like use the rules.
Resort to the rules is a great way of putting it. It's if we must.
Yeah. That's the thing. Like, it is a great. You feel, after you've listened to a few, you feel like you're in this place, playing along with them, laughing along with them. I'm not going to continue listening to it for all the reasons that I said that I probably wouldn't continue listening to it. I've stopped listening to actual play podcasts. But yeah, this is a great example.
Yes.
I suppose. Sorry.
No.
As you have been a dungeon master DM quite a bit, you'd probably be very aware of, if it's not following appropriate structures, more so than
they don't even make a
standard listener.
conceit of doing that.
Yeah.
They're just like, we're too cool for the rules.
That's the thing. Like, there's the rule of cool in Dungeons and Dragons, which is an optional rule where if everyone thinks that's cool, we can make that happen, because the rules don't actually exist. We're here to tell a story.
Yeah.
And I think, this is the one example of the extreme end of that game. I think that's definitely better to listen to and consume than the other end, because the other end is a lot of rolling dice and doing math and moving things around and that sort of thing. Whereas this is all theatre of the mind. Wonderful. Yeah, so high recommend for one of the best Dungeons and Dragons podcasts out there.
I too enjoyed it thoroughly.
Wonderful. Winner.
All right. Well, I recommended the podcast Strange Air, which was a fiction podcast about the host of a show called Strange Air, and who goes missing, and his daughter is trying to find him and do a documentary about it. What did you think?
I love the concept so much. I really love people. It's like, you know what? We're going to do an old school radio play. Awesome. Complete with like poor Foley work and like a shoehorned in romance subplot. I really love the Americana radio show Twin Peaks-esque kind of cryptid vibe.
Yeah.
Like that's right up my alley. I listened to all of it.
Mm-hmm. Me too. Big fan.
I enjoyed a lot of it. There are a lot of things. I think it's partially because of how much I enjoyed it that the flaws in it glared out so hard.
Yeah. So what glared out at you?
Part of it was the acting. Didn't you say last time when we touched on it briefly?
The acting, particularly in the first couple of episodes, it settled in a little bit, but still, like it's very hammy. It's hammed up, which is a way of doing things, but it just didn't quite gel with what I wanted from it, I guess. And also towards the end, some of the things in the narrative just fell through a little bit for me. I just felt like I didn't come out the other end as satisfied as I would like to be. Some things were really good. I really disliked the romance subplot, which is a shame, because I think it could have been done well, but it wasn't, in my humble onion.
I did feel very bad for Chase's boyfriend, actually. Like, the whole time I was like, girl, what the hell?
Yeah, and she's not a likable character.
Toxic.
And there's ways of doing unlikable characters in a compelling way, and I don't feel like this was potentially one of them.
Just trying so hard. It just deeply upset me in that respect. But I otherwise really liked the
it's a lot of soft opinions here,
storytelling.
not many hard opinions. Like I'm not like it's bad because of this one demonstrable thing. A lot of it's just like I didn't vibe the end of it. But overall, still great recommendation. Really enjoyed listening to it story wise. The radio host's voice, I forget his name.
Malcolm
Smith.
Yeah, Malcolm Smith.
Is wonderful. It is everything I want from a radio host. Just doing that classic, you're listening to 99.7.5 coming at you from the Midwest, and it's great. It's like a warm fire. That's what I thought.
What about you, Britt?
I especially enjoyed it. So when you first played it to me, because I think we were actually together in person for like the initial start of an episode, I pretty much went away and immediately started listening to it myself. Again, I love having a story read to me, so that really tickled my fancy. In private, anyway, sorry. Yeah, no, I pretty much listened to it every night while I was trying to go to sleep because I have trouble sleeping. And I would actually say in terms of the acting, I suppose it wasn't necessarily like Oscar grade kind of performance in that I guess there is definitely a tricky element to having to do audio only and not being able to use visual mediums when it comes to things like that. But in terms of how it was presented, I quite liked it in that it almost reminded me of a War of the Worlds kind of like narrative, or like an old 90s, early 2000s video game, like whether it's a little bit off, but it's charmingly so. So I'm very excited to see where it goes next, and I will consume it immediately.
Wonderful, yeah. And what did you think of the episode structure with like a full half-hour episode and then like a shorter episode kind of filling in between? Did it add anything to it, or was it frustrating? Because
I liked it.
Yeah?
Yeah. I can see why people wouldn't. But I really liked it. Just the because I enjoyed listening to the show that it was based on.
Yeah.
What was the name?
Strange Air.
Oh, it was called Strange Air. Yeah. Checks out. I enjoyed listening to those episodes almost as much as I was the actual plot pushing forward. So I was like, oh, little snippets of this. That's cool.
I quite like having things somewhat consistent in terms of the length, because otherwise I feel like I am really going way too sexual today. I'm sorry. But I feel like you're trying to get to the climax and the show's like psych and fucking just leaves you there high and dry and you're sad.
See, the only reason
More
I
is
brought it
more
up
to me.
is because if this was releasing weekly, which it originally did, and there was a half-hour episode one week and then 2 minutes the next week, I would probably not listen to that 2 minutes until just before the next full episode.
Yeah, I think that's completely valid. But if I had that expectation set up for me, I'd be okay.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I can see that. But yeah, that's the only reason because I thought you might have different opinions. But apparently, we all think alike.
Yeah, we're all in sync. It's almost like we
that why
gravitate towards people who share similar opinions.
Is that why we're friends? Did we just become best friends?
You just assumed a lot.
Whoa.
Okay,
I
before
thought
we
Facebook friends were
examine
real friends.
that anymore, let's back announce what we recommended this week. I recommended Drilled, a true crime podcast about climate action or lack thereof. Britt, what did you recommend?
The worst idea of all time, or weird abbreviation, TWIOAT.
Okay. And
It's
I recommended Reply All, a seminal tech investigative podcast that everyone should consume if you're a podcast fan.
wonderful. If you want to find us, you can find us at our home of the web, but that's not canon.com/castology. There's a form there that if you have a favorite podcast that you think we should listen to and maybe recommend, you can fill out a form there. Or if you have a podcast that you would like us to listen to and maybe recommend, fill out that form and send it through. Or you can reach out to us on social media. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on all of the big ones, except TikTok. I refuse. I've been Zane C. Weber here with...
Brittany Taylor Hetherington.
And
Harry George Wallace.
keep listening to podcasts, everyone.